Welcome to Podcast 20, HawkPodcast number 20, where we look at predictions for 2020. Will be one of the last ones we do this year, so thank you for all your listenership over the year. Certainly appreciate all your support. But today we're going to be talking about 2020 trends going forward. Okay, David.
Yes, Mike.
Christmas is next week.
Yes, it is.
So I have two questions for you.
Yes.
Over, under. Number of minutes it will take your two boys to unwrap their presents.
Oh, gosh.
And the over, under is 5.5.
Well, I think this speaks to a different, something that families do, right? Some families you open everything very quickly.
Yes, it's blitzkrieg.
And yes, we are.
And the wrapping paper is the enemy.
That's right. We will pass the presents out one at a time.
And then let me ask you this.
So it would be over.
Your wife's family, same approach?
Yes.
Okay.
I think, yes.
We had, East meets West in my household, where we were the law and order party. We're the Republicans of the establishment here, and it was one present, you open it up, you say thank you, you walk over, give the person a hug.
Oh, that's good.
Somebody writes it down so you can write your thank you note later.
That's great.
Then you go to the next person.
Yeah.
You go to the next person.
Yeah, we weren't.
And it was like a 2-hour.
That's an aspirational goal for the Liggets.
And Veronica's family was like a, pistol shot.
Let's go.
3 hours in a cloud of dust.
Yes.
So.
But always a fun Christmas morning.
Yeah.
Morning of the
what's
year.
not to love?
That's right. That's right.
All right. So, any other Christmas traditions you'll do with your family?
Yes, growing up, we did this was actually really fun for like 15 years in a row. And I wonder if people listening have kind of a similar deal, but we would go cut down a Christmas tree as a family together. So I grew up with 4 boys in my family. And some of our greatest memories, both good and bad, I think would probably be from that experience. One of the probably best memories for us, worst for my dad, was when you basically cut down a tree, you put it on top of a car, and you drive it home. And as we were on the highway coming home, the tree actually fell off the car, rolled. I believe the tree rolled unharmed into the median. Mm. It was like a grassy median, and so I just have this memory of my dad, stopping the car, running across the highway, grabbing the tree, getting back on the car. And it was a great tree that year, but yes, that was a great memory.
There are a lot of memories in my childhood that I would pay a large amount of money to find video of those events.
Oh, yeah.
And just be able to go back and watch them.
Yeah, and I actually think that one of the forgotten about things for people today are road trips with their families. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know if we just...
Can you take a road trip without a DVD player in your car?
No,
Is that even possible?
No. I don't. Okay, a road trip. We can't even go to 30 minutes away.
Go to Tom Thumb without getting enough.
But I do think that there's the lost art of the family road trip, and just for the sake of getting to spend time together as a family, and we have maybe it's just 4 boys growing up, and to fly somewhere as a family is just crazy cost. But we went a lot of places as a family and just have some of our greatest family memories growing up.
That's great.
Road trip. So. Yes, sir.
Well,
Merry
cool.
Christmas and happy holidays
Merry
to all
Christmas
if you're listening.
Yeah.
Yes, wherever people are. So
this is the 4th of 5 pods we're trying to record this month. So if you are in the market for data center content, we've got you covered.
That's right. This is this is the month of podcasting for us.
We didn't plan it this way, but again, it's kind of cool how it worked out. So podcast 19 was 2019.
Yes.
Year in review. Great. Yep. What we saw, check that out if you haven't seen it yet.
Yes.
Podcast 20 is 2020. So 2020, 1919. Anyway, so we're going to look at some things like, hey, what are we looking at going forward? Again, we're not trying to be the Nostradamus of the data center industry, but there are some things we're looking at and some expectations I think we have just based on our, perspective on the industry. So we'd love to talk through those with you. We've got really, I think, 5 things we're looking at.
Yes.
And
5 predictions for 2020.
5 predictions and these things we're looking at and how we think they'll kind of shake out or evolve, start, stop, continue. As before. So, kind of one is what does the demand look like, both in the U.S. and in Europe.
A question we get often is about demand, so we're going to hit that. Yep.
And then, hey, how are companies developing to capitalize on that demand?
Yes.
Number 2. Number 3 is, hey, what does, 2020 M&A activity look like?
Love
we
it.
certainly saw some of that in 2019. Number 4, increased investor interest in the market,
Sure.
III, and what that means for some of the folks in the market. And then last is an increased focus on renewable energy, and additionally, like water as well as becoming a focus for the provider. So
you bet.
Let's jump in. First of all, talk about what are we seeing as far as just kind of statistically or analytically demand again across U.S. and Europe, and then what do you see is driving that demand?
Yeah, that's great questions. If you listen back to our podcast 19, the one right before this one, we highlighted the fact that in the beginning of 2019, we believed that from a demand perspective, this year would look differently than it did in 2018. We hit records from an absorption standpoint, which is how we measure demand in the data center market in 2018. And so 2019 was a softer year as it relates to that. And a lot of that has to do with the large cloud service providers and some of the footprints that they took down in 2018 versus 2019. So one of the first things I do from a demand perspective and think about is just what will those large cloud service providers do in 2020. A lot of us referred to 2019 as the digestion year from a lot of the capacity they took. I do think that we will see equal to or an increase in absorption from those companies in 2020. And I think that will be in both large and smaller markets. And so one of the things that we've seen related to where the demand is happening, and I am speaking about the U.S. here specifically, is traditionally that demand has taken place in very large data center markets already. Northern Virginia, Chicago, Dallas, Phoenix, Atlanta, Silicon Valley. Over the last couple of months, and I think into 2020, we will see larger growth for smaller markets.
Yeah, and I think we talked last time about like L.A., Hillsborough, Toronto, even a little bit of having, again, not like groundbreaking, but slightly better than what you might have expected if you asked me a year ago.
Yeah,
and so you think that's going to continue. And
I do. I totally do. I mean, companies go to those markets for different reasons, right? L.A. it's in California. It's a higher price market, so you're going to be there from a strategic standpoint. Hillsborough is a more reasonably priced market with connectivity, subsea cable connectivity options, and so that's why companies would look at that market as attractive. Also, too, strategically, these big requirements all fit a larger portfolio of those companies themselves. So they have very specific areas. They might have built a facility in a part of the country, 5 to 10 years ago, and that's where they've been investing. So for them to actually go into a market within, a certain proximity of that location doesn't make sense. So, we're always looking at how those, how the company locations or the markets fit within the greater company portfolio of like larger or smaller cloud service providers. I do think we'll also see, smaller cloud service providers. There's probably 4 or 5 that are leading the way, but there's another group of 5 to 10 that traditionally have smaller requirements, and I think we'll see some additional growth from them. So all that to say, I do think there will be an increase in absorption in 2020 in the U.S. and Canada.
And then just from a demand driver standpoint, are there anything, just apart from the status quo that's going to, you think, drive some of that demand in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think as businesses rely more on cloud resources from large companies, that's one thing. That's a pretty common probably response to that question, but it is something that's been driving the demand. I mean, you cannot argue that the reason that these cloud service providers are growing so much is because companies are using their services more and more. It just makes sense.
Sure.
And that's and I think that speaks to the maturing data center user. I mean, we did a podcast, I don't know, 3 or 4 times ago, which was on, 4 or 5 ways to a successful co-location experience. And one of the things we mentioned is, companies traditionally have only done this once or twice, but you have a lot of individuals within the IT world that are now recognizing that there's other options from just co-location. There's hybrid opportunities, and a lot of those are feeding the greater cloud service provider. So I do think additional growth from some of the technologies that are out there. We've seen the idea of the maturity of 5G. We've seen companies that are using AI in different ways, both in very sophisticated ways and also in non-sophisticated ways. I'll give you an example. I was reading an article yesterday or a day before from Yahoo's former CEO, Marissa Mayer, who has actually started a company that is trying to use AI to solve very mundane tasks. And it actually falls in with our Christmas podcast, which is they've created an AI app that allows you to enter in your contacts. It shoots your contacts an email basically asking for their address so that they can send you back Christmas card labels with the person, their address, ready to be put on your Christmas card. And her point is, hey, companies talk all about AI and how they're doing these very complex tasks for businesses and all these things. We've recognized there are some very mundane tasks that we can use AI to do to help people in very simple ways. And so I think it's a lot of things like that will continue growth from a company perspective, data center wise.
Yeah, so when you look at demand really in the United States, is there any other factors, outside kind of the status quo that are driving demand in the U.S.?
Yeah. So one thing we've seen in the last 2-3 years is U.S. companies wanting to get mature in international markets. And we've been waiting on international companies wanting to get mature in the U.S. I do think we'll see an increase in that in 2020. And I think it comes from social media companies. It comes from mature international companies that go, hey, we need a stronger footprint in the U.S., and we want to do that this year. So I think that'll happen in 2020.
And then, if you look at the markets that we track, and we track 18 markets in North America, really from the market analytics side.
Yes.
And if you were to say, hey, great, those are there, but what are the kind of the next handful of markets that you're interested in and you think are becoming, meaningful enough that we would start tracking them on our we call it our insights page.
Yeah, you bet. And let me just offer if you're a provider in these markets and these are mature data center markets, but a lot of what we do is based off of market size and where we see demand. And so I would just say, don't be offended if, my comments on Columbus or Vegas or whatever these markets are is, makes it sound like these are like immature markets. But
what am I, chopped liver?
Sure. Yes. And so
talking about you, San Diego.
But I think like one market that's really interesting is Denver. We're starting to see some companies with bigger footprints look in that market. And that's, the co-location environment there is maturing. Columbus is a really good example of, a market that has a number of like Fortune 500 headquarters that are actually in the city of Columbus, and we traditionally see business requirements that want to stay within market coming from something like that. But they've also got massive investments from the cloud service providers that own and operate campuses there that traditionally can create additional requirements. So that's a market that's really interesting. There's a couple of providers in Vegas that have significant footprints and have been there for a long time and are doing some really interesting things. We toured one of those facilities when we were there a couple weeks ago. And then Salt Lake City has come up on the radar for sure for larger users as well as companies that want a West Coast location and might not want to be on, exactly on the West Coast. So those are the markets that I think we'll spend some time adding to the platform in 2020. And, I'm excited about, our continual work in those markets because there are some really exciting things happening there.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about Europe as well. I know, again, we've shifted a lot of our focus to Europe, specifically within our company. We've added some of those markets to our platform.
Yes.
And I know you've spent a lot of time, just talking about Europe.
Yeah.
Talking with folks in Europe.
Yes.
So talk about what are you seeing in Europe? What does that look like going forward?
Yeah. From a demand standpoint, it has been the last 2 to 3 years in the major European markets. It's all been about maturity from larger users, and that has really taken a lot of those market sizes up to the next level. That will continue, I believe, in 2020. And I think we as a company believe that the European growth from a percentage basis will actually outpace the U.S. in 2020. And again, that's from a percentage standpoint. So everybody, just remember that. Smaller markets over there to an extent, but certainly interesting. And I'm very bullish on, those 5 markets and even some of the smaller areas as well. And the opportunities that are there as companies really look to get more mature around their ability to provide customers with really good solutions in those countries. So watch out for Europe in 2020. I think there'll be a lot of growth there.
Okay. So that's, demand.
Yes.
Next would be, hey, how are providers responding to that demand?
Yes.
and just talk about, hey, what do you think is going to go forward from a 2020 standpoint as far as how providers are bringing supply to market?
Yeah. So the second prediction for 2020 would be that land banking is the preferred approach for data center development. And here's what I mean by that. I mean, we're focused on supply here. Trend or prediction one, we were talking about demand. Now we're talking about supply. And so I think it's really good to define the spectrum of the development options that are out there today. One is land banking. All this means is I'm going to go buy a piece of land, 25, 50, 100 acres that we can use for data center development in the future. The second would be we're actually going to build a shell, which means we're going to harden a 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 square foot building. We're going to bring power feeds to the building. We're going to ask for fiber providers to come as close as possible to the facility. We're going to bring the security there, but we are not going to add the infrastructure, the UPS, the generators, the PDUs until some sort of requirement has been completed. That's shell development. We have turnkey development, which would just be the next level. You actually are bringing the UPS, the PDUs, the generators to the site. And it's important to remember that is done if you have a 250,000 square foot facility. Data center operators are very reasonable in the way they deploy the capital to do those deals. So that's the turnkey side of things. And then there's the build to suit, which I think we're starting to see the data center operator community really listen to and hear back from data center users and what they want. So they actually have options that they can go do specific build to suits for one individual user. That's the universe of data center development that we see today.
Yeah, I think, the last one you mentioned, build to suit, is clearly the preferred, solution from an operator standpoint, where a large customer will come to you and say, hey, we need X amount of space. We'll sign a pre-lease, and we'll move in, not when it's ready, but upon some agreed to timeline.
Yeah.
So that's the ideal, we would see, hey, that doesn't always happen.
That's right.
And so there exists kind of a tension in the industry where large users want to move in quickly.
Yes.
They want space quickly. They want to get access to that, data center quickly. But, the operators need time to develop facilities, and they don't want to just have stuff sitting vacant.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that tension that exists and how operators are kind of reconciling that.
Yeah,
tension.
and I think it goes back to the trend on the land banking side of things. This is an exercise this is all about how much money you will spend on the front end on a speculative basis and how to be the wisest with your capital. And, one of the reasons that I think, there's a number of reasons that I think land banking will be the approach. But, one is we're already seeing this in the larger, I guess, and smaller U.S. and European markets, which is we want to make sure we can show the pathway for future growth in this market. And that's a really important thing that data center operators are looking to do. Another trend that I've seen within this is that this is not, retrofitting a building, buying a building, going in, retrofitting it, changing it to be a data center facility creates challenges. One of the things that the data center operator community has done a really good job of is built more efficiently. So they've worked through the design efficiency process and created something that they can replicate in markets all across the world. And so when you retrofit a facility, it's more challenging. So we typically see that they'll buy actual land sites. You mentioned the pre-lease option. The land banking thing allows them to potentially have that focus on pre-leasing for larger customers, which is important. And it's really thinking with the end goal in mind and really working to create the pathway for growth, but not have to invest, the next round of capital to get deals done. And so I think that's one of the things that we'll see. One of the other points I wanted to make, and I'll wrap this point up, but basically, if you're we've seen in the last couple of years several data center operators come into the space, form companies, and their ability to, you have to put up speculative buildings so that you can get ahead of your competition. And you have some companies that have been in the space for 10 to 20 years and have much more of a runway to build or have land out there. And so there's been an interesting I would say comparison between those types of companies.
Yeah, and for those newer companies, it really lets the market know they're serious.
Yes.
It's like I could say, hey, I'm going to start a data center company today.
Yep.
Call it Mike's Data Centers. It's going to be a 100
That would
megawatt
be your-
building.
that would
It's
be
going to
your
be a
name.
100 megawatt building. Yeah,
Mike's
Data Centers. We actually talked about this a while back of what would you name your data center? So mine would be, I thought about Infinity Tier. Check it out. See?
It's awesome. Amazing.
Anyways, we have 101% uptime. That's how good we are.
Yeah, that's great.
But I say, hey, I'm going to build a 100 megawatt facility.
Sure.
So now I've got 100 megawatts planned power.
Yep.
But I've literally nothing more than that declaration.
Sure. Yeah.
Again, that's an extreme example, but putting a shovel in the ground, permits, powered shell, et cetera, all those things are incremental steps to show the market you're serious.
And it's one of the things that, some of these smaller companies have, literally CEOs of other companies that have left, set out for a period of time and have said, hey, we have the expertise, I've got access to the capital, and we have the sites to do this. And so that's been a very unique situation, because these deployments that a lot of these users have are so big and are so strategic, and yet they will do them with some of these companies that don't have the company is new because they've got the track record with them in the past. And I do think too, on the just as we talk about land banking, there will be creative solutions that companies are working towards with the both small and large users. And I really think that's around deal structure. How are we going to make sure that we can listen to what the user needs and solve their problems, as well as, and that's from a portability standpoint. So let's say you have a user portfolio that has 20 megawatts across the country and they want to give back a certain amount in one market and grow in another one. We've seen data center operators do that in a very creative way and get deals across the finish line, as well as really listening to what the design needs are of the user and develop solutions that work for them. So those are some of the things I think you'll see from a supply standpoint in 2020. Fascinating to watch the efficiency, the capital deployment, and the creativity with the data center operator community. They've just done a fantastic job, and that's really the reason that the industry has grown so much in the last couple of years.
Yeah, so kind of to wrap that point up, we're going to see operators fall on that spectrum of land banking all the way through build to suit.
Yep.
And really it's a function of their financial capabilities, their risk tolerance,
and how much absorption and how much demand is in the market.
And honestly, how well they're doing selling their product.
Sure.
That's all part of it. So, all right, so that's supply. Bullet 3 is really just looking at, hey, what do we see from an M&A activity? We think there's going to be some increased M&A activity in 2020.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so 2020, prediction number 3 would be increased M&A activity. And I think one of the important aspects of this is really understand why are we seeing M&A activity take place today. 2017 was one of the largest years in data center industry M&A activity. 2018 and 2019 have been a little quieter, and you could probably make a similar there's probably a parallel between the way that the 2018 hyperscale absorption took place, and in 2019 we've seen that cool off a little bit. 2017, see a lot of M&A activity. 2018, 2019, it gets a little quieter. But we have seen at the end of 2019 some key acquisitions that took place. One of the reasons companies are doing this is because it allows you to strategically grow in additional markets. Hey, we're a U.S.-based data center operator. We have 10 locations, but this is a global business, and we need to be in Europe and Asia. How do we do that? We can acquire another company. That's one very reasonable approach to the M&A activity that takes place. Another thought behind it is that strategic growth with additional customers. So, hey, we traditionally have been focusing on retail colocation. We want to get into the wholesale colocation business. How do we do that? We go acquire a wholesale data center operator. And we've seen that take place. And then sometimes it happens just because of the opportunity. And it might be a company, it could be an asset, but we certainly see, companies that might market dynamics change, and their growth pathway was here, but it's really slowed down, and so there's an opportunity to acquire an asset or a business for a decent price, and it just makes sense to do it. And so I think all those things will happen in 2020. You'll see acquisitions that fall into each one of those categories, and I would say that I think 2020 will be far beyond from an M&A activity what you've seen in 2019.
Yeah, and one of the things we were talking earlier about is for kind of like that mid-size provider, they at the end of the day they're probably taking on a little bit more risk just because of a smaller portfolio. They've got to differentiate themselves in certain ways, and so if those risks don't pan out or assumptions they made about the market turn out to be not accurate, or the market changes in a way that they didn't expect, that can drastically impact the fortunes of those companies and end up being, quite frankly, on the selling block.
Yeah, and I could even flip it on the other side and say, smaller providers that have taken the risks, that have actually gotten deals done with large users. It goes back to my second point on, the strategic growth with additional customers. I mean, we've seen some smaller companies start and, maybe sit for a year or so, and then 18 months in, all of a sudden you're seeing some very large users strategically do transactions with them. And so that's another reason you could look at these smaller companies and go, hey, makes sense to acquire this company because they've been successful with some companies we haven't been able to be.
Great. So one thing we'll be keeping an eye on in 2020 is, companies, looking like they're going to be sold or bought, and
Yes.
And keep an eye on that. So fourth bullet, increased investor interest in the market.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? What does that look like? I think the way I look at that is the folks we talk to
Yep.
are kind of one of two types of investors, right? There's folks from the large, institutional investment groups that
Yep.
are looking at the data center industry as a whole, and they're maybe investing in different stocks for different companies, and they're doing all of their fundamental analysis and then layering on top of that, data center market specific information. The second group is really the folks who are saying, hey, we're either going to outright buy an entire company or a piece of it, or finance it on the equity or debt side, or participate in it at the asset level. So talk about really more that second group is probably the one that is more interesting. So talk a little bit about that increased investor activity or interest, and what does that mean for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, in 2020 there will be not only increased investor interest in the market, which is an alliteration, but will also be increased investor activity. I mean, there will be more participants in the space in 2020 from a capital perspective than there was in 2019. Here's why. One, the data center industry is highly capital intensive. It takes a lot of money to build out these facilities. I mean, I literally yesterday was we were in Northern Virginia, walking through some of the biggest data centers literally in the world in that market, and the amount of capital that it takes to not only build what's there, but then also the amount of capital that goes into the customer spend there. I mean, it's astronomical. So it takes a lot of money to support this space. So that's one thing. The second thing is, the success of the industry over the last several years is really one of the things that's called so much attention to the investor market, where they have looked at companies that have been performing really well for a number of reasons, and they've said, hey, we want to participate in this space. There's traditional real estate investor groups that have mature investment portfolios in different types of commercial real estate, office market, industrial market, retail market, multifamily market. And they look at the data center market and they don't have anything invested there. And so they really want to focus on that area because no one sees this market slowing down. The market is continuing to grow at from a global perspective. And so all those reasons points are reasons why the investor community is interested. When I started in the space in 2009 or 2008, the yields and the returns were much higher than the other real estate asset classes. Now they've come down, but they're still traditionally higher than what you would get in the other markets. So that's another reason. And I think the data center operator community is getting more creative in how they're bringing other investment groups in, not just the publicly traded REITs, but also the privately owned groups. So, and you mentioned it. I mean, we talk to the investor community a lot that's trying to understand this market. In fact, we have a podcast. All I do is just promote old podcasts, but we have a podcast where we literally outline the frameworks. If you're an investor, how do I think about this space, the data center space, when compared to the office market or these other markets? So we give you 3 or 4 different frameworks of things to go through, and I'm sure Rhett or team can put it in the show notes. But this is a space that's growing, and typically when there's spaces that are growing, they need money, and that is why the investor community will plug in even more in 2020.
Yeah, we think that's, again, like I said, it's going to increase, and so we'll keep an eye on that in 2020. Okay, so the last thing we're keeping an eye on for 2020 is just an increased focus on renewable energy, and in addition to energy, just a kind of a green philosophy. Yes. And that's true, beyond just the data center industry, but specifically just because they're using so much power, and also water. That I think there's some outward pressure, but also companies want to do the right thing.
Yep.
They want to be good stewards, and again, it's a good PR move, quite frankly. So talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the industry in that regard, and kind of how you see that developing over the next year.
Yeah, one of the industry comments made around the data center market as a whole is that global data centers use 2 to 5% of the world's electricity. And that's a big statement when you think about it. We're not talking about the U.S., Canada, Europe. We're talking about the world. So there is an increased visibility with the way our market has grown, with the visibility in the market. There has been an increased, you said, I think the word pressure, which I think is a good word because it outlines the fact that it's not easy to design portfolios to achieve 100% renewable in power, or a solution where you're really optimizing how much water you use. So data center operators have really had to work through this over the last several years. I give them a lot of credit for doing this. So I think we will see a focus on this in 2020. We've seen it in 2019. I'll give you a couple of good examples. I love giving examples, Mike. So here we go. First would be QTS, publicly traded data center operator. In kind of mid-2019, I mean, they announced that by 2025, they want to be 100% dependent on renewable energy. So that's a 6-year, 5-year push to get to a point where they've completely transformed their portfolio and the energy sources they depend on. Digital Realty this year in 2019 made some really interesting moves regarding renewable energy with their U.S. and European portfolios. And so, they've communicated there's a significant focus on realigning those renewable energy the energy sources to be renewable. In 2019, CyrusOne announced that their London facilities would be powered by 100% renewable energy, and they're on the pathway to get to that 100% renewable energy standpoint as a company as well. And so, those are just examples. If I didn't mention the provider, your company, your provider, we know there's other examples out there, but it certainly is on the radar. And it's because their customers, I think they want to do that as a corporate citizen, but their customers are also very interested in that. So certainly will be a focus there.
And if they do it right, it can actually be the financially right thing to do. It can be cheaper.
Sure.
It's not always,
yes,
but it can be. And
yes.
So again, there are scenarios in which it's a win-win-win.
Yes.
Win, as Michael Scott would say.
Gosh, any reference we can make to The Office on this podcast
he got the win for negotiating the deal. So
yes, that's right.
It's another win for us talking about it now.
That's right.
That's like the 7th win.
That's right.
For renewable energy.
And then the other interesting thing that I bring up is just the focus on water conservation. So one of the interesting interviews that we did earlier this year, our HawkTalk segment that we do, was with Alliant Energy CEO Andrew Schaap. And Andrew, one of their core focuses as a company is sustainability from a water standpoint. How do we optimize moving as much water out of the data center as we can? Data centers depend, water-cooled data centers depend on water significantly. And so that's an example of it being a focus for them. Today, it's kind of funny we're doing this podcast today, but today Digital Realty announced a partnership with Nowco Water, which is a water management technology company. And the partnership's really designed to help them optimize their water usage throughout the portfolio to be more efficient. So you're going to see that play out over the next year and years following. I mean, this is and I think the reason I bring it up as a trend is because number one, it matters. It matters beyond.
As a citizen of Earth,
yeah,
this one is
sure.
a particular interest to me.
Yes, so that's as earthly citizens, that matters. And then second, I would just say, this is good for the industry. I mean, it's good for us to be concerned about this and working through the portfolios to make sure that they're as efficient as they can be. So again, I'll go through these. I mean, we talked about demand increasing in the U.S. and Europe. We talked about land banking being the preferred approach for data center development, increased M&A activity, increased investor interest in the market, and the increased focus on renewable energy and sustainability. Those are 5 predictions for 2020. We can listen to this December of 2020 and see how
we
right
did.
we were.
Again, a lot to be excited about.
A lot of years.
Again, I think those are great points, and so we'll continue to keep an eye on these things as we go through the year.
I love it.
Again, this is available here on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud. And again, we also, if you're not aware, we chop this up into smaller content, blocks, and put this on LinkedIn.
More digestible.
Yeah.
Yes. If you don't like the
don't
40-minute version, that's right.
Yeah. Just have the hors d'oeuvres.
That's right.
The calories don't count if you eat it on a toothpick.
That's so true.
So check us out on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, anywhere you get your content, we are likely there.
Yes. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
We'll catch you on the next one.